I didn't invite you, my daughter-in-law said calmly. She said it in the house I built, standing before the walnut table I bought with hands that shook from debt and grief. 20 guests turned. Some smirked. Others looked away. My son stood frozen, as if muted. I placed my keys on the table, the metal hitting the wood like a gavel closing an auction. I have been silent for 10 years. Tonight? That ends? My name is Eleanor Hartley. I am 62 years old, and I am a widow. I walked into my Harbour Crest home just as the champagne flutes were being raised for a toast. To the new house, someone shouted, and the cheer was cut short by my arrival. My daughter-in-law, Kendra Lee, turned first. She was wearing a charcoal satin dress that seemed poured onto her, flawless under the light of the chandelier. Her smile was as thin as a blade. I didn't invite you, she said. Her voice was perfectly calm, which made the words cut deeper. I looked past her. My son, Miles, flinched. His gaze slid away from mine, fixing on a spot on the floor just to my left, anywhere but at my face. His hand was resting on the small of Kendra's back. It was a gesture I recognized. It was not an embrace of affection. It was a practiced pose of bracing, an anchor he used when the waters got rough. The silence that followed her statement was heavy, pressurized. The light clinking of glasses stopped. Around the room, Kendra's friends, the crowd she called her lifestyle and connections network, froze. Several of them were holding up their phones, recording stories for their followers. I could see the reflection of the chandelier in their dark screens, little constellations of light capturing my intrusion. They did not lower their phones. If anything, they adjusted their angles to get a better shot of the drama. In the center of it all, separating me from them, was the table. It sat in the middle of the room, a 10-seat dining table from the Red Harbour workshop. My workshop. I know this table. I know the specific grain of the walnut, the hours of sanding that went into its surface, the precise joinery holding it together. It was the silent witness to this ambush, the very heart of the home I had built. I walked forward. The sound of my heels on the oak flooring was the only sound in the room. I reached the table, the one I'd paid for, and I placed my bundle of keys down on its surface. The heavy brass tag, clearly engraved with my name, clicked against the wood. The metallic clang was sharp, echoing into the sudden, breathless quiet. It sounded like a gavel closing an auction. I need 5 minutes, I said. My voice was steady, much steadier than I felt. I looked at Kendra, then at Miles, then at the ring of expectant faces watching us. No more. Just 5 minutes to clarify my ownership of this property, and the reason for my presence. Kendra's perfect smile tightened at the corners. She was about to speak, to dismiss me with another sharp word. But someone from the back, a man in a blazer I did not recognize, blurted out the obvious question. "Wait," he said, his voice loud with confusion. "If you weren't invited, why do you have the keys?" I did not answer him. Instead, I lifted my chin and pointed toward the corner of the ceiling, just above the entryway. Because the security system is registered in my name. Every head in the room followed my finger. They saw the small, discreet dome of the camera, and they saw the small, steady red light, glowing brightly, indicating that it was actively recording. The entire pressure in the room changed. It shifted instantly from the light, airy buzz of a champagne toast, to the dense, suffocating focus of a hearing. The phones that had been recording lifestyle content were now documenting evidence. Miles looked pale. He finally met my eyes, and I saw the familiar panic there, the desperate wish to be anywhere else. Kendra, however, recovered quickly. She let out a small, sharp laugh, a sound like fine glass breaking. She stepped forward, placing her hand proprietorially on the back of the chair at the head of the table. "You're mistaken," she said, her voice dripping with a condescending pity. "This is our house." My hand was still on the table, resting on the smooth, oiled walnut. The wood was cool beneath my palm. This was not their house. After my husband died, the silence in our old apartment was too large. I sold it and everything in it that didn't fit in my truck. I was in my 50s, with debt I had inherited and hands that were soft from a different life. I changed that. I took renovation contracts, small ones at first. I learned to haul my own lumber, studied for my contractor's license until 3 a.m, and paid off the ledgers one plank, one finished job at a time. My hands blistered, then calloused, then became strong. This land, Harbour Crest, was a forgotten parcel. The bank had written it off after a developer went bust. I bought it for pennies on the dollar, paid in cash I'd saved from a dozen kitchen remodels, with a local crew, men who respected me because I could frame a wall alongside them. I built this house. We built it to last. It is an A-frame, designed to withstand the worst coastal storms, anchored deep. And this table, this was always the heart of it. I built it myself. From walnut I reclaimed from a 19th century church they were tearing down 2 towns over. The grain tells the story of that tree, like life rings. It is not just furniture, it is a testament. Miles knew that. He helped me hoist the slab into the workshop, but Miles changed. He met Kendra at a startup seminar. Suddenly, his worn-in jeans and flannel shirts were gone, replaced by sharp, joyless suits. His language changed. He spoke in clipped, efficient sentences, full of synergy and deliverables. He stopped calling just to talk. He stopped visiting the workshop. The rift didn't start with a fight. It started with her quiet, tinkling laughter. My work, the things I built, were adorably rustic. My home, which I had bled for, was a charming little project. Those little jokes, which Miles never defended, slowly became invisible conditions. We met at neutral restaurants with grey walls and tiny portions. I was not to speak of my work. I was an anecdote, the handy mum, a quaint story to be told, not a person at the table. In the 3rd year of their marriage, I saw the erosion. I saw how she looked at this house, not as a home, but as an asset she was being kept from. So I protected it. I met with an attorney and established the Hartley Revocable Trust. My name is the only one on it. I am the sole trustee. This house, its land, and its core contents are the trust's primary asset. When their apartment building suddenly needed major foundation repairs and they had nowhere to go, I offered them this place, not as a gift. I typed up a simple loan-to-stay agreement. It granted Miles and his spouse temporary residence, contingent on their rental situation, with no transfer of rights. It explicitly forbade using the home for commercial purposes. Miles signed it without even reading it, relieved to have a problem solved. I kept my copy. I kept silent. I have a rule I learned from woodworking. You cannot force the material, and you cannot teach with words when people are not ready to learn. Until they moved in, I came here every evening. I would wipe this table down with linseed oil, feeling the grain I knew by heart. It was a ritual, a reminder to myself that this is a home, a sanctuary, and a reminder of its value. My hand is still on that wood. I can feel the faint ridges of the grain, the life rings. It feels like placing a hand over my own heart, steadying it. I am not a guest here. I am the foundation. Kendra's smile was a challenge, a claim staked in my own living room. But I wasn't surprised. This confrontation was not an accident. It was a scheduled event. The first thread appeared 2 weeks ago, an email, forwarded to my account by mistake. It was from a company called Blue Gull Catering, confirming a Lee family celebration for tonight. The address on the confirmation was mine, Harbour Crest, not Lee. Hartley. I opened the attached invoice. A deposit had been paid. The name on the card was Miles, but it was a joint account I had never heard of, one he had obviously just opened with her. The billing address was not their old apartment. It was a post office box in the next town over. A blind, a cold feeling, sharp and precise, settled in my stomach. I am a builder, a restorer. I look for structural flaws. I started digging. It did not take long to find the others. A furniture rental company. The delivery schedule was explicit. Arrive 10 a.m. Remove existing walnut dining table to garage. Set up 10-foot glass import. Remove my table. The one I built from the church timbers. The one Miles and I had celebrated his 21st birthday at. They were going to haul it to the garage like scrap lumber. Then, the florist. The order was extravagant. 20 towering centerpieces. Tucked at the bottom of the invoice was a special instruction, clearly typed, "Do not place arrangements near any existing photos of Mrs. Hartley." They were not just hosting a party. They were erasing me. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, Mrs. Petroff. "Big party at your place. Eleanor looks wonderful. Did you finally go on that vacation?" I picked up the phone. I called Miles. Straight to voicemail. "The subscriber you have reached is not available." Not busy. Not unanswered. A deliberate rejection. I called Kendra. She answered on the second ring, her voice like warm honey. "Eleanor, hi." "Kendra," I said, keeping my own voice level. "I'm hearing about a party tonight." A perfect, practiced pause. "Oh, that it's nothing, honestly. Just a few of Miles's new contacts. You know how these things are. We're handling everything. Don't you worry about a thing." "Handling it," I repeated. "Exactly, Miles is just swamped. But we've got it all under control." I hung up. Control? Yes. I was beginning to see. My trust in words was gone. I turned to data. I installed this home's security system. I logged into the admin panel for the smart lock on the front door. There it was. In the event log, a temporary access code, valid for today only, from 8 in the morning until midnight. The code was not assigned to Miles, it was assigned to Lee events. I opened the archive for the doorbell camera. I rewound the footage. It took me less than 5 minutes to find what I was looking for. 1 week ago, Kendra and Miles standing on the porch, his back partially to the camera. I could not hear his question, but I heard her answer. Her voice was clear and sharp in the night air, impatient. "No, Miles. Absolutely not. Don't invite her. Don't invite me to the home I built, to the table I crafted." My first impulse was to call my lawyer and have the locks changed, to call Blue Gull and the florist and the furniture company and cancel every order. But I am not a wrecker. I am a restorer. I don't demolish. I deconstruct. I find the rot, and I cut it out. So I did not cancel. I prepared. For the last week, I have been methodical. I went to a print shop. I printed the catering confirmation. I printed the joint account invoice with the anonymous post office box. I printed the furniture delivery order. And I highlighted the line, "Remove old table." I printed the florist's bill with its cruel little note. I printed the log from the smart lock, showing the creation of Lee events. I downloaded the video clip from the doorbell camera and saved it. I slipped each document into its own clear plastic sleeve. I organized them, one by one, in a simple, slim black binder. The binder that is now sitting on this table, right next to my keys, waiting. I held her gaze. Our house, I repeated softly. That is the misunderstanding we are here to correct. I looked around at the silent guests, at the phones still pointed in my direction. By all means, raise your glasses, I said. But before this party officially begins, we will observe 3 conditions. I held up a finger. 1. I will speak, and I will not be interrupted. I held up a second. 2. Every statement made in this room from this moment forward, by anyone, must be accompanied by proof. Opinions are not facts. I held up a third. And 3. You will be respectful to the catering staff. They are here to do a job, not to be props in a performance. Kendra's eyes narrowed, but she gave a short, sharp nod. She thought this was a game of words, a battle of composure. She believed her audience, this curated crowd, was her defense. She glanced at Miles, a silent command for him to handle me, but I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at the phones. And please, I said, my voice cutting through the whispers. Lower your devices. This is not content. This is a family matter. If anyone wishes to continue live streaming, the garden is lovely this time of evening. A few phones reluctantly lowered. The guests looked uncomfortable, trapped between their hostess and this unexpected, uninvited confrontation. Miles finally found his voice. He took a step forward, his hand out. The peacemaker. Mum, please. Can we not do this now? It's just a small party. It stopped being a small party when you claimed my home, I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my spare set of keys, the original set. I held them up, the brass tag glinting. This is not your house to give parties in. This is my house. The guests were growing restless. A woman in the back whispered, "This is agonizing. Should we leave?" But no one moved. Their impatience was overshadowed by a sharper curiosity. All their eyes kept drifting to the simple black binder on the walnut table. It sat there, full of facts, waiting. The tension was so thick it felt like a physical weight, pressing the air out of the room. The standoff was broken by an awkward cough from the kitchen doorway. A man in a chef's toque, his white jacket stiff with starch, was hovering. He looked miserable. "Excuse me?" he said, directing his words at Kendra. "Mrs. Lee, I'm sorry, but about the menu progression, there's a note." Kendra's smile was brittle. "Not now, Andre. But it's about the allergy note," he persisted, holding up a printed sheet. "The kitchen is asking—" I stepped toward him. "May I see that?" The chef, flustered and clearly wanting to be anywhere else, handed me the paper. I read the order, the menu items. And then I found the special instructions at the bottom. I read it aloud. Allergy ensure Eleanor not attending. A sharp, collective intake of breath. Miles actually winced, closing his eyes. Kendra's laugh was high and strained. A typo. That's just a simple misunderstanding. A clerical error. I agree, I said, handing the menu back to the chef. It is a misunderstanding. I turned back to face her, to face my son. So let's clear it up. Let's solve this little clerical error with the correct paperwork. I walked to the front door, which I had left ajar. I opened it wide. 2 people were standing on the porch, as I had asked them to. They were not dressed for a party. I've invited 2 witnesses, I announced to the room, to help us verify the facts. Tom Sherman, my master carpenter, the man who had helped me frame this house, stepped inside. He nodded at me, his face grim. Beside him, Sarah Jenkins, the president of the Harbour Crest Homeowners Association, walked in. She was holding a binder of her own. The trap was set, the audience was seated, and the hearing had just begun. Kendra's face was pale, but my attention was no longer on her. It was on my son. Tom Sherman and Sarah Jenkins stood near the door, silent, official. They were my perimeter. I turned to Miles. He looked like a man bracing for a blow. Miles, I asked, my voice quiet. What did you sign when you moved in? He swallowed, his gaze dropping to the floor. The temporary agreement, the residency paper. Did you read it? I skimmed it. Mum, I didn't think. You didn't read it, I stated. It was not a question. And the new joint bank account, the one with the post office box. His eyes darted to Kendra, a quick, panicked flicker. Kendra said it would be easier for house expenses, utilities, groceries. Groceries, I repeated. I reached for the black binder. I unclipped the first 3 plastic sleeves. I slid the papers out and placed them on the walnut table, one by one, forming a line between us. First, the Blue Gull catering email, with the Lee family name. Second, the invoice for the imported glass table. Third, the work order explicitly stating, remove the old table. I tapped the 3rd paper. Does removing my table count as a house expense? Miles. I leaned in, lowering my voice so only he could hear the true, sharp edge of it. Did you know about this? Or did you just choose not to know? Did you just stay silent to get through the day? His composure finally, utterly, fractured. The polished veneer he had worn since meeting Kendra cracked, and the exhausted young man I knew was visible underneath. I'm tired. Mom, he whispered, his voice breaking. I am just so tired. Everything. Anything I say, it just turns into a fight. I just want peace. The word hung in the air. Pathetic. Peace, I said. Neutrality in the face of injustice isn't neutrality. Miles, it's choosing the stronger side. It's choosing the oppressor. You are not keeping the peace. You are just funding the war. I reached back into the binder. This time, I pulled out something without a plastic sleeve. It was an old photograph, the corners soft from time. I slid it across the table until it stopped in front of him. He looked down. It was him, at 22. His hair was longer, his smile wide and unburdened. Sprawled out on this very table in my workshop, the day I had put the final coat of oil on it. He was giving the camera 2 thumbs up, Do you remember what you said that day? I asked him. You threw your arms out and you said, "This is it, Mum. This is the heart. This will always be home." He closed his eyes. A single, difficult breath shuddered out of him. I sold that promise, he said, his voice thick. I sold it for a quiet house. What quiet? Miles. I answered, my voice unforgiving. There is no quiet. There is just silence. Your silence. Kendra, seeing her ally crumble, surged forward. Her voice was sharp, defensive. We were just trying to make it better to update it. This house, it's all so dark. I turned to her, my patience gone. Better, I said. Cannot be built on theft. You don't update by erasing. You don't improve by lying. Lying is a strong word. Kendra, I said, my voice dangerously soft. I prefer misrepresentation. But as I said, opinions are not facts. Let's stick to the proof. I tapped the black binder. You said this is your house. Let's verify that claim. I pulled the first document from its sleeve. The guests leaned in. The air was still. This, I said, placing it on the table, is the certificate of trust for the Hartley Revocable Trust. It is a legal, binding document. It lists the sole trustee as Eleanor Hartley. That is me. It lists the primary asset of the trust as this property, this house, and all fixed assets within it, including, specifically, this table. I let that sink in. It states, in very clear terms, that no part of the trust's assets may be sold, gifted, or used for commercial purposes without the express written signature of the trustee. I don't recall signing anything. I pulled out the second paper. This is the loan-to-stay agreement, the one you skimmed, Miles. I looked at my son. Article 4, Section 2. I've highlighted it. It expressly forbids the hosting of any commercial, promotional, or public relations event without the trustee's prior consent. I turned my gaze to Kendra. You called this Lee Events when you registered the key code. That sounds commercial to me. I then looked to Sarah Jenkins, the HOA president. Sarah, you brought the covenants. Sarah stepped forward, opening her own binder. Her voice was firm, impersonal. The Harbour Crest HOA bylaws, Article 7, Section C, prohibit the removal or structural alteration of fixed signature assets when the registered owner is not present. It is grounds for an immediate fine. I looked at Tom Sherman, my carpenter. Tom, is this table a fixed signature asset? Tom, a man who doesn't waste words, stepped forward and rapped his knuckles on the walnut. It is, ma'am. I helped you install it. It is anchored directly to the floor joists with 4 concealed steel bolts. It was designed as part of the house frame. You don't just remove it, you have to deconstruct it. A horrified murmur rippled through the guests. This was no longer just an argument. This was a conspiracy. But perhaps, I continued, they simply didn't like the style. I slid the next paper out. It was the email from Kendra to the staging company. I read her words aloud. We must erase all the heavy, cheap, rustic, technical craftsmanship. We are aiming for a clean, modern aesthetic. I paused, running my hand over the wood. Cheap. And then, the attempt to hide it. I held up the menu. Chef Andre. You confirmed this note. Allergy ensure Eleanor not attending. Was signed by Mrs. Lee. The chef, looking miserable, nodded quickly. Yes, ma'am. That's her signature on the master order. and the misunderstanding about my invitation. I took my phone from my pocket. I didn't need to play the video. I just pressed play on the audio clip. The room was so quiet. Her voice filled it easily. No, Miles. Absolutely not. Don't invite her. I put the phone down. I looked at Sarah Jenkins again. Sarah, the key code. The temporary access code given to Lee Events was never registered with the HOA security desk. Sarah announced. Another clear violation of the covenants. I stacked the papers neatly. So, we have an unauthorized commercial event in violation of a trust. We have a violation of a signed residency agreement. We have a conspiracy to defraud the HOA by illegally deconstructing a fixed asset. And we have security breaches. I looked at Kendra, then at Miles. According to the contract and the HOA bylaws, I have sufficient grounds to terminate this party immediately. I have grounds to levy fines for every single violation. And I have grounds to terminate your residency agreement, effective tonight. The word terminate hung in the air. The guests looked horrified. This was no longer a spat. It was an eviction. I saw the change in their faces. The woman who had been whispering about leaving was now watching me, her expression not one of impatience, but of sharp, sudden respect. The smirks were gone. They were watching a demonstration of power, and they understood it perfectly. Kendra was white. Miles looked like he was going to be sick. I let the silence sit, heavy and complete. Then, I pushed the papers back into the binder and closed it with a soft, final click. I have no interest in doing any of that, I said quietly. The shift in tone was a vacuum. I am not interested in fines. I am not interested in administrative hearings. I looked directly at my son, then at his wife. I wanted a family dinner. I did not want an administrative action. Kendra's composure, so perfect and polished moments before, was gone. She was exposed, the legal framework of her fantasy party dismantled. She fell back on the oldest, weakest script. She forced a brittle laugh. Well, she said, trying to rally the remaining guests. What can you do, difficult mothers-in-law? Right. The remark fell flat. It was a pathetic attempt to reclaim the narrative, to paint me as the jealous, interfering matriarch. The guests, now fully aware of the legal and financial realities, just looked at her with a mix of pity and embarrassment. I didn't take the bait. I didn't get angry. The binder was closed. The legal case was made. Now, there was only the human wreckage. I looked at her, truly looked at her, not as the adversary, but as the young woman who had just been caught in a lie of her own making. The charcoal satin dress suddenly seemed too stiff, like armor she could no longer hold up. Kendra, I said, my voice changing. It was no longer the voice of a trustee or an owner. It was just my voice. Who told you that you had to be this perfect? The question wrong-footed her. It was not the attack she was expecting. She had no prepared defense for it. Her perfectly manicured hand went to her throat, her fingers finding the thin gold chain she always wore. It was an unconscious gesture, a search for an anchor. Her lips, which had delivered the cruel dismissal, began to tremble. What? She stammered. Who taught you that your life had to be a performance? I asked again. Who makes you feel so small that you have to erase everyone else, including my table, just to feel like you have enough? Her eyes filled with a sudden, stinging hot shame. She tried to blink it back, but she couldn't. My mother, she whispered, The admission was so quiet, I barely heard it. But in the absolute silence of the room, it was a thunderclap. Melissa. It's always Melissa. Nothing is ever right. The house, the clothes, the party. It is never, ever enough for her. So you took that pressure, I said, not as an accusation, but as a diagnosis. And you passed it on. You gave that poison to Miles, and you tried to give it to me? From the small cluster of remaining guests, a woman I vaguely recognized as one of Kendra's friends spoke, her voice full of a sad, quiet confirmation. It's true, she murmured, looking at the floor. I was with her in the powder room at the club last month. She was crying after a phone call with her mother, just sobbing. No one stepped in to defend Kendra. No one could. The quiet, invisible truth had just taken a seat at the table. And then I saw it. The final, quiet shift. Miles, who had been standing beside his wife, his hand still resting on her back in that practiced, supportive pose, slowly, deliberately, let his hand fall to his side. It was not a violent rejection, but a simple withdrawal of consent. For the first time all evening, he was no longer bracing her. He was standing on his own. Kendra felt the loss of his touch. She seemed to shrink, the last of her fight dissolving. I walked to the side buffet, where a stack of linen cocktail napkins sat. I pulled one from the stack, walked back, and held it out to her. She looked at the white square of linen, then at my face, her eyes wide with confusion. She took it. It was not forgiveness. It was not an alliance. It was a boundary. A small, civil gesture to mark the end of the hostilities. It was me, telling her that this was the part where she stopped fighting and started dealing with the damage. A break doesn't always have to be loud, I said, thinking of my work, of the materials I knew. Sometimes a true rupture, the kind that changes everything, doesn't scream at all. I looked from Kendra to Miles, and at the quiet, watchful faces of the strangers in my home. Sometimes, I said, it just sounds like wood cracking, very quietly, in the cold of the night. And in that room, everyone heard it. I walked to the head of the table, to the chair that was mine. I didn't sit. I pulled it back, the legs scraping the oak floor with a sound of finality, like a judge taking the bench. Then, I looked at my son. Miles, I said, my voice calm. I gestured to the chair at my right hand. Sit down. It was not a request. He looked at me, then at Kendra, then back at me. He moved slowly, stiffly, as if walking through deep water, and took the seat. He stared at the empty plate in front of him, the chair to my left, the one my husband always used. I left empty. It would remain a space for the past, a reminder of the man who had helped me dream of this house, and of the promises made at this table. I walked to the stack of heavy porcelain dinner plates the caterers had set out for their buffet. I picked one up. I set it down at my place. I set another in front of Miles. I set one at my husband's empty place. I turned to the room. The guests who remained, along with Sarah and Tom, watched me, their faces a mixture of apprehension and respect. I am a builder, I said. I do not like to see things wasted. The food has been prepared, and it will be eaten. But the terms have changed. This is no longer a public relations event. This is a private dinner in the Hartley house. I held up my hands. So you have a choice. Anyone who wishes to stay for a meal and respect the rules of this home is welcome. Please, find a seat. Anyone who was here for networking or for the Lee family party. I nodded toward the glass doors leading to the deck. The garden is lovely, but you are excused? A tense silence. A man in a very expensive-looking blazer cleared his throat, stood abruptly, and said, "I have an early call. Actually, my apologies." He did not look at Kendra. He almost ran from the room. A woman in sequins followed him, 3 others, a small, tight cluster, stood up as one and made their apologies, their eyes cast down, 5 in total. They moved quickly, their departure a quiet admission of their allegiance. The room felt cleaner, the air lighter. The remaining dozen guests, plus Sarah and Tom, looked at each other. Then, slowly, politely, they began to take seats, spacing themselves around the long table. They sat in a respectful silence. I remained standing. I picked up a spoon and tapped it lightly against my water glass. The ting was clear and sharp. "The rules of this house are simple," I announced to the seated guests. Rule 1. We do not humiliate one another. The evidence has been presented. The point has been made. It is done. Rule 2. All phones are to be put away. There will be no live streaming, no photographs. Rule 3. No one here is being asked to choose a side. You are here to eat, not to serve as a jury. My gaze fell on Kendra. She was the only person, other than me, left standing. She was frozen. Her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Her eyes were fixed on the table, scanning the walnut surface as if seeing it for the first time. I knew what she was seeing. She was seeing the small, crescent-shaped knife scar near the center, from a Christmas 2 years ago when I slipped carving the roast. She was seeing the faint, dark circle, no bigger than a dime, near the end, where a candle had tipped over during Miles's 25th birthday dinner. She was seeing the map of a life she had deemed cheap and tried to haul to the garage. I saw her chest hitch. It was a sharp, painful intake of breath. The chef, Andre, stepped out from the kitchen, his hat in his hands. "Mrs. Hartley," he asked quietly. "The clam chowder is ready to be served." I nodded at him. "Please, Andre, serve our guests." The entire axis of the room, which had been balanced on Kendra's performance, now rotated and settled firmly on me. The battlefield dissolved, and it became, once again, my dining room. Kendra was left standing alone, a refugee in the room she had tried to claim. She looked at Miles, but he would not meet her gaze. He was staring at the small burn mark on the wood. She looked at the head of the table, where I stood. She hesitated. Then she moved. But she did not move to the chair next to Miles. She did not move to the chair opposite him. She walked to the far side of the table, halfway down, isolated. She pulled out the chair herself, the sound of it loud in the quiet room. It was a self-demotion, a public step down. She sat. Her back was rigid. I took my seat at the head of my table. The meal began, and so did the sentence. The catering staff, models of quiet professionalism, cleared the soup bowls and began serving the main course. The clinking of silverware on porcelain was the only sound. It was a civilized meal, but it was the civilization of a ceasefire, not of peace. The guests ate, or at least moved food around on their plates, but their attention was fixed on the 3 of us at the head of the table. I waited until the last plate was set down. I had 1 piece of evidence left. I reached into the black binder and pulled out a single, sealed white envelope. I did not open it. I placed it in the center of the table, on the wood, where everyone could see it. "This," I said to the table, "is the why, the motive." Kendra, who had been staring at her plate, snapped her head up. "It is a printout of an email," I explained. "From your mother, Kendra. From Melissa. She sent it to you one day after you and Miles moved in. You accidentally included me when you replied all—" Kendra's face lost all its remaining color. "In it," I continued, "your mother refers to this house as hopelessly outdated and a rustic log cabin. She states, quite clearly, that if you are to have any social standing, you must replace this table, quote, to be worthy of the Lee family name." I let the words land, but the true impact was not on her. It was on Miles. He flinched, a sharp, involuntary movement. He slowly set his fork down. He reached into the inner pocket of his expensive suit jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a bank statement. He unfolded it with trembling hands and placed it on the table, next to the old photograph of him, covering his own smiling face. $45,000, he said. His voice was a choked whisper. I stared at the paper, then at him. I did not understand. "The staging," he clarified, his voice thick with a shame so deep it was suffocating. "The new glass table, the deposits, this party. It wasn't house expenses. It was $45,000. He finally looked at me. His eyes were swimming. "It was the savings account. Mum? The one I started 6 years ago? The one for the down payment?" The breath left my body. The money I had matched for him. Seed money for his future. For his own home. He had drained every penny, in secret, to pay for this illusion. Before I could even speak, another guest spoke up. It was a quiet man sitting next to Sarah Jenkins. He had come with her. "My name is David," he said, his voice apologetic but firm. "I'm with the bank Sarah uses. I'm her guest tonight." He looked at Miles. "I overheard your conversation with Sarah before dinner. I'm so sorry, son. I recognized the account prefix. I ran a check." He turned his gaze on Kendra. "That new joint account was opened at 10:03 in the morning, exactly 1 hour after the timestamp on that email from your mother." The sequence was sickening. The demand from her mother, the opening of the secret account, the draining of my son's future. "And it's worse than that. Eleanor," Tom Sherman said from his seat. My carpenter's voice was low and full of a craftsman's fury. He had been quiet all night, just watching. He pulled out his phone. "I came by 3 days ago, like you asked, to check the deck supports for the party weight," he said. "The staging team was here. They were under the table." He turned his phone around. The screen showed a close-up of the thick walnut leg of my table. There was a bright blue chalk line drawn around it. "I asked them what in God's name they were doing," Tom said, his voice shaking. "They said the lady of the house told them it was the only way. It wouldn't fit through the door. They were marking it to saw the legs off." He swiped to another photo. A man holding a reciprocating saw. "I told them if they touched this table, I'd have them arrested for destruction of property. They packed up and left." The room was utterly still. This was not erasure. This was violation. The remaining guests were looking down at their plates, ashamed. The woman who had spoken earlier whispered, "Mrs. Hartley, we are so very sorry. We had no idea." Kendra was shaking violently now, her whole body trembling. She looked at me, at Miles, at the condemning faces. She stammered, the tears finally coming, hot and desperate. I just didn't want her to humiliate me. I didn't want my mother to say I failed again. The confession was small and pathetic. I looked at this woman who had been willing to destroy my life's work, my son's savings, and my home, all to appease her own mother. So you chose to humiliate us instead, I said. The words were cold, factual. You chose to humiliate my son. You chose to humiliate this house, all to avoid your own shame. The final, definitive silence descended. Then Miles pushed back his chair. The sound of the wood scraping the floor was a violence. He stood up. He did not look at me. He looked across the expanse of the table, at his wife. His voice was hollow, but it was not weak. For the first time in 10 years, it was perfectly clear. I am not going home tonight, Kendra, he said. He took a breath, a ragged, painful thing. I am staying here. He paused, and the final lock clicked into place. I need boundaries. Everyone in the room, myself included, stopped breathing. The barrier of habit, the silent, toxic pact that had defined their marriage, had just collapsed. Miles's words hung in the air. I need boundaries. The room was frozen. His declaration, more than all the evidence, was the true verdict. I stood up slowly. The dinner was not finished. I reached for the black binder one last time. I unclipped the final document, the one I had prayed I would not have to use. I laid it on the table, facing Kendra. The title was clear. Even upside down, notice of termination of temporary residence. This, I said, my voice leaving no room for negotiation, is the legal consequence. You violated the commercial use clause. You attempted to destroy a fixed asset of the trust. This notice is legal. It is binding, and it gives you 24 hours to vacate. Miles looked at the paper, then at me, his face pale with panic. He thought I was evicting him, too. I shook my head, just once, to stop his thought. I turned to my son. This notice is not for you, Miles. Not unless you choose it. I paused, letting him understand. You are welcome to stay, but only if you choose to stay. Not because you are afraid of the argument, not because you are trying to save face. You stay if you are staying here, in this house, as a Hartley. I then turned my full attention to Kendra. She was staring at the termination notice, her breath caught in her throat. I am not going to call the police about the saw, I said. I will not be fining Chef Andre or his staff. They were operating under your fraudulent instructions. I will pay them for their time. But make no mistake. I placed my hand flat on the table, next to the notice. From this moment forward, this is my house. Every decision, every guest, every menu goes through me. Or, I pointed to the front door. You go through that door. The choice is yours. Kendra looked at the door. She looked at Miles, who was refusing to look at her. She looked at the guests, who were now just silent witnesses. She opened her mouth, perhaps for one last defense, one final, cutting remark. But no sound came out. She closed it. Her shoulders slumped. She slowly, almost reverently, reached out one hand and laid her palm flat on the walnut table, the table she had tried to saw apart. I understand, she whispered. Miles watched her. He took his own set of keys, the car, their shared apartment, the life he had been living out of his pocket. He placed them on the table with a quiet, definite click. It was an echo of my own action when I arrived, but his was an act of surrender, not of war. "I'm staying tonight," he said, his voice stronger now. "I am staying here. And tomorrow I am going to tell Kendra's mother the truth. And then I am going to tell myself." Sarah Jenkins, the HOA president, who had watched this entire exchange, nodded once, closing her own binder. "Given that the unauthorized promotional event has been immediately terminated," she announced, "the HOA will consider the matter closed. No fines will be levied." She looked at me. "The family dinner, however, may continue." She and Tom Sherman quietly let themselves out, their purpose served. The remaining guests began to murmur, rising to leave, understanding this was now too private. I thanked them for their time. Soon, it was just the three of us, in the large, quiet room. We sat in silence, me at the head, Miles to my right, and Kendra, far down the table, isolated in her defeat. I stood up, went to the sideboard, and brought back the chair that Tom Sherman had used. I placed it at the table, not close, but not in exile. I sat. We were three silent figures around the table that had almost been pushed out the door. I found an unopened bottle of red wine the caterers had left. I opened it. I poured 3 glasses. I pushed one toward Miles. I pushed one down the long, polished surface toward Kendra. I raised my own. My voice was calm. "To truth," I said. "And to boundaries." Miles raised his glass. After a long, shuddering breath, Kendra raised hers. The sound of the 3 glasses touching was faint, barely there. The judgment had landed. It was as soft as sawdust, but it was absolute. Thank you for listening to my story. I'm curious, where in the world are you listening from? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to connect and hear your thoughts. Please subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, give this video a like, and if you can, support us by hitting that hype button so more people can hear this story.